product offering to insurance to different services. The idea was to provide a landscape of what's going on in Europe in terms of subsidized support from governments, markets, opportunities. We've also looked at what we consider the most promising propositions currently available in the market. We looked at key players and profiled them in this report. We've also done a short part on the EV driver, what's their needs. We based our analysis on a survey that was conducted by the EV charging service last year, and that enabled us to identify the key needs, wants, and worries of EV drivers. We've also provided a view on what we consider solution evolution in the future in Europe, what could be provided to residential customers to meet their needs. On this slide, you have the link for both EV charging and New Energy Business Model subscribers. And together with that report, we've also published a database that lists all the existing propositions for residential drivers in Europe. We listed the key characteristics of each propositions, so pricing, structure, type of product offer, where the proposition is available, and many more features. Again, you have the link to access these databases. Today, we will only provide a short overview of the reports. If you want to access all the insights that we've developed during that research, you will need to consult the reports and the database that are available on the website. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to either schedule a call with you or answer your question by email afterward.
Alex, I'm not sure the slides are moving forward at the moment for everyone. I don't know if they are for everyone else. But I'm still looking at the title.
So we're still on the first slide?
Still on the title screen here. Slight technical glitch.
Is it working better?
Yep.
So you can see my screen with the new report and the database pictures.
Yeah. Yes.
Perfect.
Key findings and report overview I've got.
Okay, well, we can go to the next slide. Key findings and report overview. And I'll pass over to you, Will, to present us the EV market in Europe.
Thanks, Alex. So this headline is not telling any of the attendees on the webinar anything new. I'm sure, as everyone knows, the European EV market has grown rapidly. It's doubled in market size in 2020 and probably will have doubled again in market size in 2021, although the official figures aren't out yet. And all the key drivers are pointing in the right direction for rapid growth in EV uptake. There's government policy and regulation, which is very supportive. There's consumer demand, which keeps growing. And almost every day you're hearing reports of auto OEMs who are committing to going 100% electric. So the question is not if the EV market will grow. The question is how much it will grow by. And the Delta EE EV charging service, we've tried to answer this question. And we have forecast that there will be around 83 million EVs on European roads by 2030. And the key markets in Europe, which are going to be responsible for driving the majority of this growth, are the likes of Germany, the UK, and France are the three biggest. So this rapid growth in EVs today and continuing throughout the decade is a massive opportunity for energy retailers. And on the next slide, we discussed that despite this obvious and large opportunity, we really feel that the EV market to date has been largely untapped by energy retailers. And the image on the slide details firstly how many battery electric vehicles there are on the road in each market. So for example, around 400,000 in the UK, around 678,000 in Germany. And the shading of the different countries on the map indicates how many EV tariffs are available to these BEV drivers. And the key takeaway on this slide is that despite really promising EV uptake, and as we mentioned on the last slide, there's a lot of room for growth as well, the major EV markets in Europe, apart from the UK, have less than 15 EV tariffs available for these drivers. So there's room for growth, and there's still a lot of opportunity to take advantage of the growing EV market for energy retailers in Europe.
So yeah, now that we've actually looked a bit at the landscape, this kind of where our report started, and we wanted to actually look at the propositions and try and understand a little bit more what was actually being offered. So to do that, we looked at over 50 residential EV tariff propositions offered by suppliers in Europe. And to actually qualify, we wanted to make sure that there was a tariff associated with the proposition. So it wasn't just like EV solutions, but actually it was connected to a tariff and supply of electricity. And so when we looked at those, there are various level of tariffs, but the main ones that we found were static time of use, dynamic time of use, flat, and subscription-based tariffs. And then from there, we actually then looked at the various solutions that were offered. Oh, I think this slide. But we focused on 3 different solutions. The first one being a battery EV solution. So is there an EV offered or something around the EV itself? Then the second one being the charging solution. So around the charge point and just everything that comes with it. And then finally, the home integration. So that's everything that would be linking the EV to the home. And when we looked at those 3 solutions, we looked at both the hardware, the software, and services that are there. So the main key away that we found was that innovation is still a little bit limited, with very few proposition offering time of use or just many services. So most of them are still static time of use with focus around charging.
Thanks, Arthur. We have some questions around our definition of a tariff and an EV tariff. Could you provide some explanation around that briefly?
So the way we decided to select was to understand, is the tariff itself marketed for EVs? So is there something about the tariff itself that speaks, I guess, to an EV driver? So that could be purely marketing in terms of it's on the website as a, hey, this, if you have an EV, you should like look at this. Or then we also made, I guess, we decided to add dynamic time of use tariffs to those. So they weren't really, in the most cases, marketed as EV tariffs, but they were very applicable to EV drivers.
Yeah, and as a general reminder, what we call a tariff is a energy supply proposition for a residential customer in our case.
And just another question, no, we did not include hybrids in battery electric vehicles.
Yeah, we only looked at battery electric vehicle in that research.
There's a question around, of those 83 million EVs in Europe, what shares is battery electric versus plug-in hybrid? Roughly around 60% of those vehicles will be battery electric. Today the shares, I guess, closer to 50-50, but we anticipate that throughout the decade there's going to be a greater shift towards battery electric versus plug-in hybrid.
Thanks, Will. We also have a question around whether we looked at proposition for home or on the go. Maybe you can answer that question, Arthur.
So our main focus was on home, but since it is connected to a tariff connected to the home, or like a tariff for the EV driver at home in terms of home charging, but we did look at, I guess, as public network access as a service. So is there on-the-go charging? So the on-the-go charging would be more as a add-on to what was happening at the home.
We will pick this up shortly, actually. Essentially, they're the typical journey that tariffs tend to go on, and they tend to start from the home, and often will then spread out beyond the home to include on-the-road charging, for instance, and other away from home services. But they tend to start, as Arthur was saying, because they're wrapped into your energy supply, they tend to start as a domestic offer.
Thanks, Nigel.
I've got a slight time lag here, so I don't know if we've moved on to the next slide or not, but I'd like to talk about this idea of how players can seize the opportunity. Yes, I finally caught up. I think I'm about 20 seconds behind everybody else. Yeah, so it's quite an interesting question that people are asking, which is, look, what do you mean by an EV tariff? You know, what does that even mean? And as Arthur said, we started by just saying, well, an EV tariff is what somebody calls an EV tariff, and that only gets you so far because there are so many potential elements and there are so many potential needs that can be identified. So in order to make sense of all this complexity, the report looks at a wide range of possible wants and worries, as we call them, and it tries to distinguish between those requirements that are essential, those that are nice to have, so desirable, and those that are unnecessary or that may become important in the future, but they're not important yet. I mean, amongst other things, the report draws on Delta's own proprietary customer research, where we identified several key customer wants. And these in descending order were environmental concerns, saving money, and the appeal of new tech. Those were the big three ones. And we also looked at worries, because many first-time EV drivers have concerns about what may go wrong. And the top three on the road charging concerns were price and convenience and range anxiety. So if we translate these findings into features, you come up with what we consider to be the core essentials that address those top worries and wants. So for instance, a good static time of use tariff can address a lot of concerns about saving money, whereas a more advanced dynamic time of use offer may improve on it a bit, but it doesn't necessarily make a huge amount of difference, and it does add quite a bit of complexity. Similarly, worries about range anxiety and convenience really make home-based charging a vital service, with on-the-road charging a good additional feature in the nice-to-have or desirable column. Other essential features include apps to help tech-minded EV drivers manage their charging effectively, and 100% renewable domestic energy supplier to meet those environmental concerns. So what we end up here is with this anatomy of an offer: the must-haves, then the nice-to-haves, and eventually some more future-looking things. And that should help orientate ourselves as to what a core offer should be.
Thanks, Nigel. So that was brief highlights of what we've looked at in this report, and I encourage all the attendees to actually read the whole report, which has more in-depth insights. But now we will cover 3 questions that we consider as being particularly important and are part of this report. And the first question is around where are the opportunities in Europe. So markets are very country dependent, and what we're seeing in the different countries is quite linked to uptake of EV, but also to innovation of players. So yeah, where are the opportunities?
Well, as this slide says, there are still opportunities everywhere, but they vary in character. They depend on what the competition's doing, and also very much what the subsidy and support environment looks like. And I would urge you to go to the report. It covers all the markets shown here in detail, allowing you to compare them and see where the sweet spots are. Perhaps if I pick up a couple of markets, and then Will can do the same. Germany's by far the largest market, you know, with uptake being pushed by both government and also manufacturers. There are strong financial incentives at all levels, really, national, regional, local, plus a supportive COVID-19 stimulus package. So we expect to see growth continue, as William was saying. Germany also has some of the highest electricity prices in Europe, plus a substantial number of PV systems, many of which will fall out of the feed-in tariff scheme in coming years. So charging and energy management solutions become very appealing to customers. Also, flat or zero rate EV tariffs are relatively common in Germany, unlike elsewhere, and that could be down to the fact that time of use tariffs require the installation of an expensive smart meter, and of course smart meter penetration is very low in Germany. Good examples of these include both Lichtblick and Sonnen, both of which have a €0 tariff for customers acquiring a pack comprising solar PV, battery and charge point. And the other market I'd like to pick up on before I hand over to Will is the UK, with around 400,000 EVs today. It actually has the most EV specific tariffs in Western Europe today, so it's the one that's shaded orange here. I think there were 16 at last count, though many of them are quite similar. They're typically static time of use propositions that offer cheap overnight charging, sometimes just for a few hours. There's still lots of room for innovation here. Perhaps only Octopus Energy and OVO offer truly novel services, but again, it's all in the report, so you can have a look at that. But the UK is aiming at phase out of new petrol and diesel sales as early as 2030, so this might be a market that develops more quickly than some of the others. Will, I don't know if you want to talk about France or Spain.
Yeah, well. Sure. For me, I think the other standout market to mention is France, and in some ways it's almost the most puzzling market. So as you can see, the EV market has grown really well. It's one of the top 3 markets in Europe, and there are around 410,000 electric vehicles on the road now. But there really are a limited number of EV tariffs available here. And I think this is probably down to the consumer's reluctance to move away from EDF's long-standing regulated tariffs. And I think indicative of this is that EDF's own EV tariff was launched around 6 years ago and hasn't changed much. So quite a puzzling market in terms of a lot of EV growth, but not much development in terms of the actual tariffs themselves. And then 2 markets that are lagging behind the European leaders are Spain and Italy. Although, so I think they're around 2-3 years behind the other European leaders. But we do expect these markets to grow really quickly. There's supportive government policy, and in Spain, there's a bit more at stake in there than just climate policy, because the automotive sector represents around 10% of the Spanish GDP and about 9% of employment. So we expect that market to develop quite quickly. And I think in Spain, we've seen things beginning to change a little bit. You can see in Desa there offers a free electricity from 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. and for the first 125 kilowatts per month. And EDP is also aiming at providing a complete driver package for EV drivers. So while Spain and Italy are a little bit behind the 8 ball, we expect them to develop quite quickly moving forward. And yeah, to mention that these markets are looked at in a lot more detail in the report, and there's also notes around the Belgian, Norwegian, and Dutch markets as well.
Thanks, Will. So we have questions on the main blockers for EV tariff. Is it really just lack of customer uptake, or are there also issues around profitability for providers or lack of smart meters like we mentioned in Germany? What is your view on that, Will and Nigel?
I think it's a great question. Certainly in France, as Will said, I think there's this connection with regulated tariffs. Consumers seem reluctant to move away from regulated tariffs generally, and that seems to stifle some innovation. I think there's a lot of confusion more generally. If I had to pick one general point, there's a lot of confusion about what this core offer should be. You know, when you look across Europe, the offers vary a lot, and so you can see the market is trying to work out what exactly should this offer comprise? So for instance, Will's just mentioned there that in Spain, EDP's offer really majors on the road reassurance. Okay, so they're looking at this really low uptake of EV drivers, and they're thinking, well, maybe, you know, it's all about range anxiety and breaking down, and they'll do things like they'll send a truck out to pick you up when you run out of charge. So what they're sending you is a message: don't worry, we can fix this, it's safe to get an EV. And that's what they've decided is important to drivers. Elsewhere, different things are deemed important, but the market has not in any meaningful way settled on this core anatomy of what an offer is that we try to address in this report. So I think there's a lot of sort of tentative offers, people feeling the way, putting something out there, seeing what the response is, testing the market, getting the feedback, and then taking the next step. And that next step hasn't happened yet. So I think it's just a market that's just still finding its way, basically. And this sort of, hopefully, this sort of insight will help people, you know, see what others are doing and what's working, what's not, and what customers are after.
Okay.
I think it's also important to say, well, the market is growing rapidly. It's still relatively small compared to the overall market size. The number of EV drivers, well, EV sales are around 20% of new vehicle sales in the developed markets. The overall vehicle park is still really small compared to combustion vehicles. So whilst it's an exciting market, the overall size of the prize today is still relatively small, and therefore maybe not that attractive to energy retailers.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So our next question is around the leading edge players. So we've selected a few ones. Maybe Arthur and Will, you want to give us a bit more details on some of those, the ones that are particularly interesting according to you?
I can start, I guess. I think for me, the one that I found the most interesting was the offer from NLX, their open charge subscription. And what I found really interesting is that they're really there to make it as convenient as possible for a new driver to actually join the tariff and actually built, I guess, off their previous like tariffs and all. So how they do that is that they have, through their own charge point, which they're able to cross-sell through the open charge, they're able to actually split the consumption of the EV and the home. And so by doing that, it allows them to actually have just a fixed subscription fee on the electricity for charging your car, while keeping a regular tariff for the rest of the electricity of the house. So this, I mean, for me, it just makes it really simple for a new driver to come, because they don't really have to change or think about their electricity consumption for their home yet. They just have, they can just come to NL, they can rent actually a electric vehicle, and then they can take this subscription and charge their car unlimited or with unlimited amount of electricity for a fixed price. So it really is just simple and allows to build up, I guess, this amount of security for a new person coming into the EV market.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, basically NLX is going to split the consumption between the home consumption and the car consumption, which is pretty interesting.
Yes.
And do we know any
Yes.
other player which is offering that currently in the European market, or is it something that is unique?
So from our research, we could only find OVO doing it with Kaluza. So using Kaluza software, they're able to also split this the consumption of the EV and the home. And we've started to see this, but we're hoping that it's something that actually is coming more into the market with this idea of like type of use tariff, where the electricity is separated between how how it is used.
Okay, very interesting. So what's your pick, Will?
I think I might have cheated here a little bit and gone with Jedlix, who they're not actually an energy retailer, they're a smart charging provider, but they have partnered with a number of energy retailers to enable those retailers to offer EV tariffs. And the reason I picked Jedlix, well, three reasons I picked them is, firstly, they are the most advanced car-centric smart charging players. So this is controlling the charging of the vehicle through the car, and there are a lot of benefits to that. One of them being that you get access to the state of charge of the car, so you're able to optimize the charging of the vehicle a lot better. They're also one of the players who are providing grid balancing services to the TSOs through the charging of the vehicles. And these 2 points kind of point towards where these EV tariffs might be heading in the future, where, yes, you're ticking all those boxes, such as providing 100% renewable energy, making sure that the vehicle is fully charged when the customer needs it. But it also shows the potential of these EV tariffs in providing grid balancing services and sharing those, the value that you create with the EV driver and helping them actually have a lower energy bill at the end of the day. So I think looking at JEDLIX, you can see where these EV tariffs, or how these EV tariffs might develop in the future to include flexibility.
Okay, so that's a topic that you look at quite a lot in the EV charging service, dynamic charging, smart charging. So JEDLIX is one of the leading players, if I understand correctly, in the residential space.
Yeah, they are one of the leading players, and it is a topic that we look at quite closely in the EV charging service. We've recently released a report towards the end of last year, looking at how these smart charging players are not only optimizing behind the meter, so making sure customers are charging at the cheapest times of day or at times when there's lowest carbon on the grid, but also providing these flexibility services or grid balancing services to the DSOs, to the TSOs.
Yeah, that's an interesting opportunity for these actors. Tibber is also providing flexibility services from EV charging, I believe. Just one of the examples that we looked at in depth in the report. So the last question that we're going to address is our view on solution evolution, and I'll pass over to you, Nigel, on that question.
Apologies if I'm still on my time lag here. Yes, this comes back in many ways to this question of complexity. Okay, so we've been talking about how there are so many candidate components for an EV tariff, and how suppliers are working with those and trying to work out which ones they need and which ones they don't. Another part of that is that tariffs themselves evolve over time, and so they start inevitably with something that the supplier thinks is a set of core features, and they then typically add features on over time that they think extends the offer. But actually, that journey is really two journeys in parallel, okay, that we've broken out here. So one is the technology integration journey, and the other is the tariff evolving itself by adding more services. So okay, let's break that down a little bit. The usual place European suppliers start with technology, the technology journey, is by upselling a physical domestic charge point along with the tariff. Okay. Now, some companies, such as Ovo Kaluza in the UK, will only upsell so-called compatible charging equipment, which what they mean by compatible is the equipment is designed to get the best out of their tariff. So maybe the customer ends up saving more money than if they just had an off-the-peg charger they could just buy from anywhere. Other companies, their charge points are much less tightly integrated, though even those from some small suppliers can surprise you. If you look at Van der Bron in the Netherlands, you know, that they will provide live insight into your charging sessions, so you get a sense of how much you've charged, how much longer charging may take. This is very attractive stuff in terms of our core offer, because it plays to that control and tech requirement that many EV motorists have. And then beyond the charger, an obvious next step is integration with solar. So for instance, OVO's anytime chargers will balance grid power with rooftop solar so that the householder gets the most out of their investment in PV. And you can see it's not a huge step then to upsell PVs that integrates with your charge tariff. A really interesting example of solar integration is in Spain, where Repsol's home charging service can even link into community solar to optimize local consumption of community energy. Okay, and then finally, full integration with other domestic loads isn't really available yet, but it's the logical end of the story. But it's very rare today. The real standout example, I suppose, would be Tesla. You know, they obviously not a supplier. They can already combine and optimize their vehicles, their Powerwall batteries, their solar roofs to provide customers with a high degree of grid independence.
Nigel, if I may just interrupt you briefly, that's very interesting,
sure.
the integration with solar PV. Do you think that all the changes and ends in net metering schemes in Europe are going to have an impact on that?
Potentially, yes, because if we start to see a shift towards greater self-consumption and of course just rising electricity prices, there becomes this challenge to optimize my loads. And again, it plays into this technology want. You know, the more I can play with this stuff, the more I can save money, which is a key need, and that I can also optimize my tech, which is a key need. So yes, I think this PV plus EV story has got a long way to run, and it's very much next generation. You know, it's only just getting started, and of course, you know, with the energy crisis as well, that will give it an extra fillip. So I do think that's something that should be looked at more closely by a lot of suppliers, actually. And then briefly, when we look at the tariff journey, the usual place where suppliers start is with provision of a special tariff, as we've been talking about. Often, not always, but often in the form of a static time of use rate that applies overnight, sometimes at weekends. Though I think I mentioned earlier, some of these charging periods, these cheap charging periods, can be very short. Octopus Go in the UK just gives you 4 hours between 12:30 AM and 4:30 AM, but there are exceptions. EDF Energy's 98 hours in the UK. Okay, its rates are nowhere near as low as Octopus Go, but it's a lot more flexible. But we typically start there, and then what happens is they spread out onto on the road charging. We had a question earlier about destination charging, on the road charging. The journey is very much you start in the home, you charge there, and then you add on the road charging as the next step. And if you look at something like Vattenfall's InCharge network, it's a very good example. We talk about you know, tens of thousands of these charging stations on the road, and its app provides an overview of those tens of thousands of charging stations around Europe, along with related cost information, so you can see when you get there what it's going to cost you. And then we move to a more advanced stage, which is some of this stuff we've already talked about a little bit, but some of these advanced tariffs remain relatively rare, though I'm thinking here about things like dynamic time of use tariffs. There were a few like Jedlix we've mentioned. They've started partnering with, for instance, suppliers in France. We're also seeing the emergence of simpler pass-through tariffs from 1 or 2 companies. I think we've mentioned Tibber. But the ultimate tariff, the right-hand end of the tariff journey on my continuum, is about a lot more than just energy. Now whether this proves to be the way we go or not, it's the logical end of the story. We may not get there, but imagine a service that charges a single monthly fee for an electric vehicle with maintenance, insurance, breakdown assistance, electricity, all included. Essentially, the entire EV motoring experience for a single monthly fee. Well, this, I'm sure you can guess, remains extremely rare. Though we have got one example in the UK, in fact, a company called On2, which will do all of that, and you just pay one monthly payment. Remains a fascinating experiment, and we're keeping a close eye on it. So if we look at that, those two journeys are going on. You start at one end, you build in your core requirements, and then you start adding on the nice to have features over time. That's how tariffs are done in EV world.
Thanks, Nigel. So we're actually running out of time, and I realized that there are a few questions that we haven't covered. So as I said at the beginning of the webinar, we'll get back to you by email to answer your questions that we haven't tackled in the webinar. The slides and the recording will be available. And of course, the reports and the full database are also available on the webpage that you can access with your logins. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to one of us. We'll be very happy to have your comments, feedbacks, or questions on the research that we've produced. And I just have to wish you a pleasant rest of the day. And thanks a lot, Arthur, Nigel, and Will, for your participation in that webinar.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot.